Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Friedman, Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I'm the MC for this evening. Also visible on your screen is David Adler, President of the AJA, so good evening to you as well, David. The topic and format tonight will be a little different to our usual events. Instead of having a prominent speaker on some issue of interest to the Jewish community, we have an author who hopes to become prominent after releasing his first novel titled Righteous Kill. Now with me is Ted Lapkin, the Executive Director of the Australian Jewish Association, and I'm chatting with him tonight because a few weeks ago his book was published. So good evening to you, Ted.
Good evening to you, Alan.
The story of this book is very engaging. It encompasses two time periods, present day and October-November 1940. And these two time periods are linked by a genius scientist who discovers time travel and sends a raiding party of elite Israeli soldiers into Nazi-occupied France. Their mission is simple: to ambush Hitler's personal train and decapitate the political and military leadership of the Third Reich. Now, I won't give away any more at this point, although Ted might want to go into this a little further as we discuss the book. As usual, the chat function is available for general comments, so feel free to send messages to the audience during the discussion. And also, as usual, please keep yourself muted, or we might do it for you, so that any background noises won't be distracting to everyone. Okay, so Ted Lapkin spent the first half of his childhood in North Carolina before his family moved to Israel. And he subsequently joined the Israeli army, where he served as a combat intelligence officer in the Golani Infantry Brigade. After graduating summa cum laude from Tel Aviv University, he returned to the United States and began working in what would become a career in political analysis and government relations strategy. He met his Australian-born wife Sharon in Washington, DC, and moved to Melbourne in 2002, and since then he has written political opinion columns for local and international newspapers and political magazines. He's also been a speechwriter for US congressional leaders and Australian government ministers, and was a contract columnist for the ABC Drum when it was an opinion website. Ted has also worked as a Liberal Party political advisor for a wide variety of parliamentarians, including cabinet ministers and the current speaker, Tony Smith. Ted has been involved in Jewish communal organisations and has worked for both AJAC and the ZFA, writing pro-Israel opinion pieces that have infuriated anti-Zionists both within and without the Jewish community. The Australian Jewish Association is very lucky to have a person with Ted's experience and contacts. And to hear a bit more about his first novel, he joins me now. So thanks for your time, Ted.
Thank you.
Ted, your book starts with a very interesting prologue, and you quote a line from the Talmud, which says, and I quote, "And the Torah says, if somebody comes to kill you, arise and kill him first." So why is that quote important to you?
Well, it's important in general, but I thought it was particularly pertinent to the book because it's a time travel book. So it takes this Talmudic admonition or aphorism about basically self-defense and gives it an entirely new spin. So, you know, arise and kill him first. Well, okay, so you travel back to October 1940. That's a way of doing it. So I thought it was appropriate given the focus of the book.
And were there other candidates for this sort of guiding philosophy?
No. This was, I just thought it was particularly appropriate in view of the time travel aspect of the
Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about your background. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about your military service in Israel?
Yes, I began my service in the equivalent of the Navy SEAL, Shayat Shlosesre, and I ruptured an eardrum in a dive, and so I transferred and I became a combat intelligence officer, and was assigned to the Golani Infantry Brigade, and I was with them in 1982 when the First Lebanon War broke out, and so the capture of the Beaufort Castle, the first night, that was basically my baptism of fire, and my military experience was, I think, essential to the writing of this book, because as somebody who comes from the military, there's nothing more annoying than seeing a television program or seeing a movie or reading a book where there are just some absolutely implausible, militarily implausible elements. So it was very important to me that beyond the science fiction time travel element, that everything should be completely realistic in terms of the combat scenes and the tactical decisions. And last year, I had the opportunity to go to France because I had, I'd done a lot of research in putting together the book, and I'd looked at, aerial photographs from the 1940s, and it was very gratifying to go there, boots on the ground, and see that everything worked out.
Yeah.
Everything was completely, all the research was accurate.
So you joined the Israeli army. Was that because you were living in Israel?
Yeah,
and that was
made
just,
Aliyah.
right. So as an Israeli citizen,
Yes,
you automatically went into the army.
That's right. There's mandatory military service.
And how long did you spend in the army?
6 years, because I was everyone does the
basic,
males do 3 years, or now they do, I think, 32 months. They cut the term of national service by 4 months, which I think was very unwise in view of the threat surrounding Israel. But at the time, it was 3 years, and then if you're selected to go to officer training and you get through the training program, there's a very high attrition rate, and you have to sign extra. So I ended up serving 6 years,
and
then went to university.
Oh, so the intention was always to leave the army and then study?
Yeah, I didn't see it as a career.
Okay.
20 or 30 years, no. And then I went to university. And
so what ages were you in the army? From what to what?
From about
18?
20 to 26.
Okay. And so then you left the army and you went to university?
Well, you leave the army, but you keep on doing a month a year. You keep on doing reserves. So I left the regular army and began to study at university, but you do your reserve service.
And the army obviously expects a lot of people, most people will leave. Do they try and keep you in?
Yes, they tried. Yeah, but I was, been there, done that, tick that box.
Right.
Time to go off and do something else.
Okay. So you studied journalism at?
No, I studied history, European history, actually.
Okay.
At Tel Aviv University, which had a very good history program. And then I cast about what to do, and I decided, I was given the opportunity to go to one of the Ivy League universities in the United States, the University of Pennsylvania, and was given a free ride in terms of a full scholarship. And so I did a Master of Government Administration, and then was offered jobs working as basically a lobbyist for Jewish organizations in the States.
So was this journalism, not really journalism per se?
No, I never studied journalism per se. No.
Okay, so this was public policy and government administration?
Well, history, and then later it was public policy. But you study history, you study any of the liberal arts, basically you do a lot of writing, and you hone your writing skills, and I think that's stood me in good stead.
And is the history that you studied, was that applicable to the work that you did?
Well,
sort of.
It's a history of basically Western civilization. Europe, and starting from ancient Greece, and North America, European civilization, Western civilization, if one use that term. So yes, I've found that it's very useful to have that kind of corpus of knowledge when you're writing speeches. You might put in a factoid that's relevant to a speech you're writing for a minister or for a business leader. Sure.
And so does that necessarily mean that you're interested in politics, or are the two sort of separate? You've got government, sort of the running of government, and the political side of it, or are the two combined?
The two are meshed. And the thing about the British satiric series, Yes Minister, I mean, of course it's satire and it's comedy, but it's also true. It's also true. And anybody who tells you that public service doesn't have their own political agenda, they most definitely do. So everything is political.
And how long did you spend in the United States studying?
Well, I did a master's degree. That took me a couple of years, and then I was working, I worked first in Tallahassee, Florida, the capital of Florida, and then in Washington, D.C., and then I met Sharon.
And was the plan to, I mean, I guess before you met Sharon, was the plan to go back to Israel?
At some point, yeah.
Okay. And then things changed.
I was waylaid by an affair of the heart, I guess, for want of a better term. Yeah.
Okay. And so then you met Sharon and you came back to Australia?
Well, we had a long-distance relationship, and then I decided, you know what, the hell with this, quit my job, came out here, began a PhD program at the University of Melbourne that I never finished, and began writing opinion pieces for the local paper, and that came to the notice of Colin Rubenstein at AJAC, and he offered me a job, and then through that I went to work for the Howard government, and this led to that, like, you know, things in life, one thing leads to another. And
did you have strong political views in those early adult years?
Yeah, I've always been a conservative. I've never been, you know, there's that saying that, you know, if you're not a Marxist by the age of 16, you have no heart, and if you're not a free marketeer by the age of 30, you have no brain. I was never, you know, I read Marx and Engels and Trotsky as a young man, and it just never computed with me. So I've always been
always on the conservative side of things.
Conservative, yeah.
And what were the universities like in those days?
They weren't as bad as they are now. At least you could get your point across without being shouted down or deplatformed. Is the term that's used now. But you know, the humanities were, you know, I mean, you had centrists and you had conservatives in terms of the academic staff, but there were a lot. It wasn't as monolithically left as now, but you had it leaned to the left.
Yes.
But it wasn't as one-sided as it is now.
And I guess growing up in Israel, you naturally had an interest in Israeli politics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sort. I mean, I think the Israeli political system is a disaster. I think Israel's in dire need of electoral reform. But in a way, it's too democratic because it's proportional representation. You know, you have one House of Parliament. It's proportional representation, and you have a proliferation of small parties. But yeah. Why don't we talk a little bit about the book?
Yes, I'm going to ask you about that. So I want to ask you where this idea came from.
Well, I wrote about that in the book, and I guess the best way to cover that is just to read what I wrote at the end in the author's note. And I write, the genesis of this novel can be traced to the summer of my 14th year, when I purchased Sir Stephen Runciman's 3-volume History of the Crusades. Shows what a pathetic childhood I had that I was reading those every time.
You're reading
when
a
I was 14,
history of the Crusades.
When I was 14 years old. But anyway,
okay.
You know, I guess I was something of a nerd. But in those pages, I read how Crusader armies massacred Jewish community after Jewish community while advancing up the Rhine during the summer of 1096. In response, my adolescent imagination propelled me back to that time and place, armed with an AK-47 and a copious supply of ammunition. The Al Pacino remake of Scarface had yet to be filmed, but the scenario I envisaged always climaxed with a say hello to my little friend moment with me on the ramparts of medieval Mainz, which is a city in the Rhine Valley where one of the worst massacres happened. My publisher, Humphrey Hunter, who should be tuned in, so shout out to Humphrey in the UK. My publisher, Humphrey Hunter, describes this book as Back to the Future meets Zero Dark 30 meets Inglourious Bastards. A more accurate allegorical description of the teenage daydream that started all this would be a Jewish Tony Montana, who's from Scarface, meets the Golem of Prague, meets Detective Jonathan McClane from Die Hard. Yippee-ki-yay, mamzerim. So that's basically the genesis of the book, and it's something that's been, you know, I guess, bouncing around in my subconscious, and then, you know, it surfaced. And this would be an interesting story, and this thing led to that. You know, I didn't have the whole thing planned out from the beginning, but I thought about it, and this work, and you work out an outline, and the book was written on weekends and evenings when I was working as a political advisor.
Right.
So,
did you come from a family that was had direct involvement in the Holocaust?
No, well,
because people of our generation obviously had parents that were survivors.
Look, my family on both sides were, the children of my parents were children of Jews who had gotten the hell out of Dodge, gotten the hell out of the Pale of Settlement, in the 1890s and early 1900s, when you had mass emigration of Jews escaping pogroms and anti-Semitic persecution in Tsarist Russia and the Tsarist Russian Empire. And they had come to the United States, but all of my relatives who did not move to the United States, and who, my mother's side from Galicia, and on my father's side from Belarusia, from Minsk, they were all killed in the show.
So was the Holocaust more of historical interest, in, religious, national?
Look, I'm not Shomer Shabbat, but I am I define myself as a Jabotinsky. I am a Jewish nationalist and a Zionist, and it's always been of interest in terms of my I'm very Jewish.
Yes, but you feel your Jewish identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and of course the book has got a sci-fi component to it.
Well, we had to get the Israeli Special Forces guys back to 1940 somehow, so you had to come up with.
Are you a sci-fi fan generally?
Yeah, I am. And particularly Robert Heinlein, Starship Troopers is. I read that when I was a kid, and it's a great book.
So I guess you just sort of thought, well, wouldn't it have been good if some modern day soldiers could go back and knock him off?
Well, you nip the Holocaust, the time period where this happens, it's after, and I come up with a kind of a pseudo-scientific but plausible on its surface way of explaining this, because of course there's something called the Novikov principle when it comes to physics. You can't go back in time, even if you had a time machine, you can't go back and murder your own grandfather, because that would create a paradox.
But that would change history.
Yeah, that's right. So in this book...
So how do you get around that?
Well, I say the Novikov principle has a threshold. And so you can make changes below the threshold. You still can't go back and shoot your own grandfather, because that would create a paradox. But there are certain changes that beneath the threshold, so it's not universal, it's not absolute, the Novikov paradox principle, but there are certain changes you can make that are beneath that threshold. And the world will change, but it won't change so drastically and beyond recognition that it would create a similar paradox.
Okay,
that's how I got around it.
Okay, so this is your device that you use.
That's right.
Okay, so this is
right from here.
Okay. Okay, so what I want to ask you is how does somebody write a book? I mean, what's the very first thing that you do? Do you sit down in front of a computer or with a blank piece of paper? How do you go about writing a book?
Well, first of all, you have to have the nucleus, the germ of an idea. It changed over time, as you do your research and develop. But, okay, how can we get Israeli soldiers back to the Second World War and prevent the Holocaust? And then you do your research, and, I can't really lay out for you A led to B led, because it doesn't happen that way. Well, it's just it's a subject. It's art. It's not science.
Yeah.
Fiction writing, and so I can't go back and tell you that on this day I decided to go this way as opposed to that way. But it's a creative process that if successful, it just leads. And you don't know which building block you're gonna reach for to build it, but at the end of the process, you have an edifice.
And what
have this thing?
But what about characters? Do you sort of invent a character and then try and fit them into the story, or do you start with the story and the character evolves?
Both. Depends on the character. depends on the character. In some cases, you might say, okay, I need a character, there needs to be some conflict, there needs to be some tension, I need some, so you create a character to fill that role, and on the other, another character might, and that would be probably one of the minor characters. The major characters, you kind of, I don't know, it's symbiotic.
Yes.
It's you don't build the story around the character, and you don't build the character around the story. It's a fusion.
Did you have a sort of a person in mind when you were creating your lead character?
Kind of like Yoni Netanyahu,
Okay.
Bibi's brother who was killed at.
So that was the sort of person.
Raid? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, now that I think of it, I never thought about that. But yeah, probably Yoni Netanyahu.
Right.
Who was killed at Entebbe.
So writing a book like this requires a lot of research.
Oh yeah.
And you describe places in France and the roads, and they drove along this road and turned right into that road. Did you go to all of these places?
I didn't go to all the places. Well, first of all, the first thing I did is I went and I bought a 1 to 50,000 topographical map. But the problem is the topographical map was from 2014 or 2015. But I stumbled across this absolutely wonderful site that's produced by the French government. It's called Geoportal, and it has just it's their geophysical kind of mapping agency. And one of the things they had in there was they had a plethora of aerial photographs from the 1940s and the 1930s. So the problem is I have a map from 2014. Well, it shows the topography, it shows the woods, and it shows the roads and everything from the 21st century. Well, that doesn't do it. Yeah, okay. It helps me to a certain extent, but in order for you to have what's known as verisimilitude, which is making it plausible, I have to know what the terrain was like back in 1940.
Yeah.
And so I was able to go and look at these old aerial photographs. And for one of the courses I did when I was in the military was aerial photographic interpretation. So that came in handy. It's like, everything fell into place.
Right.
And like I said, when I went back there, I went to the major sites of the book. I went to the tunnel where the ambush of Hitler's train happens, and then I went to Sète, which is a port town on the Mediterranean where they have another major battle, and everything fit, everything worked, everything was plausible. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see them doing that.
So you obviously get a feel, don't you, for when you're there, but you don't need to be on every single track and road.
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. Although I did, anal retentive that I am, I did study almost the entire route or unfolding of the narrative. I did have a look at most of it on those old French Air Force aerial photographs in the 1940s and 1930s.
Okay. In the book, and I've got to say, it's a cracking read. And I should have congratulated you earlier because you read a lot of books where they say you can't put them down, but I've got to tell you, this is literally a can't put down book, and it's a fantastic story. But you actually go into the structure of the the German army, and I'm just wondering, how do you learn about some of these long titles? So there's one I don't even, you can explain it to me. What's an Obersturmbannführer?
That is a SS Lieutenant Colonel.
Well, how did you know that?
Well, I mean,
you learned about
there's a plethora of material out there, the World Wide Web, and you do your research,
So you had to sit down.
Yeah, I had to do
and say, okay, I'm going to write a novel.
I want this guy, in terms of what would he be in real life? He'd be a lieutenant colonel. He's in the SS. Oh, and actually, if you're talking about Obersturmbannführer Gesche, who was Hitler's bodyguard, he was a genuine historical figure. He was Hitler's bodyguard who traveled with him everywhere. And of course, we're ambushing Hitler's train. So he plays a a reasonably significant.
So he was
role.
a real person.
He was a real person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay.
And he gets his.
We're not going to tell people too much about what unfolds, but I can tell you it's very, very interesting. How long did it take you to write this book?
Look, I started it and then I stopped. So all up net, probably 3 years.
Okay.
It spread over a long period of time because I stopped and I wrote a couple of screenplays in the middle and then I went back to it.
Is that average, or do people that write novels, can they churn them out quicker or slower?
Some people can turn out a book every year.
Right.
It really, there's no hard and fast rule.
Do you think that next time will be easier?
Yeah, well, next time has already started.
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
The next time has already started. Look, but this was a big book. This is 150,000 words. It's a 466 page book. So it was a big book, and it was very important to me just in terms of for it to be, tactically, militarily credible. I wanted the research to be impeccable. So.
And do you go into this project thinking how many pages the book is going to be?
No.
Or it's just finished when it's finished?
It's finished when it's finished. That's right. And for example, the epilogue, I originally, because I felt the book ends and I felt I owed it to the reader to provide them with an explanation as to why that happened. I don't want to provide too many spoilers because I want everybody to buy the book, of course. And I struggled with the epilogue, and I went back and forth with Humphrey, my editor. I wrote something, and he said, "Now this sounds like a political science term paper. Do it again." And so I went and I did it like 3 or 4 times until kind of I hit the right note.
So for those that are not authors, which is most people, what roles do people like publishers and editors have? How much input do they have into the final product?
I was very fortunate to stumble across Humphrey Hunter from Silvertail Books in the UK. We've become good friends during the process. So, he's very much my way politically, and so we talk about, which is unusual because the industry tends to be kind of more left-leaning, right?
Yes.
So, and look, he read the manuscript and he loved it. We did a
So this is the publisher?
This is the publisher, Humphrey Hunter.
Okay.
Humphrey Hunter. Yeah. And then, he's the one when it's a very, at least in this case, I don't know how it is when you're working with like McGraw-Hill or a major, massive international publisher. He has a kind of a boutique publishing house, but it was very collaborative. We went back and forth.
So the publisher will ring you up or will send you a note and say, "Look, I just don't think that works. Something's not working there for me."
Yeah, that's right. Well, in terms of the epilogue, he said, no good. Go back, do it again.
What about during the main text? Did that happen a lot?
The manuscript was more or less, except for the epilogue.
Was that by the time the publisher gets it?
Yeah.
Is that the finished?
Well, it's rough. It's rough, and it needs to go editing, and it needs to undergo proofreading. But it's the essential shape of it is there. Yeah.
And were there changes made along the way, or is it pretty much the way you finished it?
Well, except again for the epilogue.
Okay.
I had to rewrite a few times. Yeah, well, pretty much.
Okay. And you mentioned an editor. So what does an editor do?
Well, the editor there are different types of editors. I'm fortunate to be married to one, but you have the story editor who just goes through it and makes sure that everything flows and that there are no non sequiturs, there are no gaps. Who look at it with a fresh set of eyes and say, "Well, hold it. How did you get to here? From here, there's either a missing link or it doesn't compute." And then you have the editor who goes through with a fine-tooth comb and just makes sure that there are no typographical errors, that the sentences flow. There might be, too many adjectives.
So it's a grammatical.
It's grammatical and also stylistic. Yeah.
Okay. And we touched on some of the real people. Were there many characters in the book that are based on real people?
Well, Adolf.
Yeah.
And Hitler, Himmler,
Those guys.
Goering, and they all meet a very deserved end. But David Ben Gurion,
Yes.
he also has a kind of a cameo role towards the end. Other than Winston Churchill makes an appearance and the British War Cabinet.
Yes.
So there are a few historical figures, but other than those major historical characters, no, they're all fictional.
And does somebody read the words of your real people and check to make sure that that's the way they would speak? I mean, when you say Winston Churchill, you've written, Winston Churchill might say something, or Ben Gurion might say something. I mean, maybe in this case they weren't major roles.
I don't know.
But what if you tried to introduce a character, a Churchill or a Ben Gurion? Would somebody come along and say, but they never used to talk like that? Is that
possible? And I'd say, well, artistic license.
But there would be somebody that would be checking for that sort of thing?
I don't know. Not in terms of Silvertail books. No. And look, at the end of the day, it's a story. It's there to entertain. It's there, and of course, there's an element, I'm Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish, and of course the Holocaust it does loom large in my psyche, and so, the fact that I could go back and basically there's 6 million more Jews in the world, it's great, and most of them moved to Israel.
Yes.
So, so in our time, instead of having, Israel has a population of like 30 million. But
it's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be nice. I found when I was reading the book that I needed to sort of grab my phone and go to, the Google Maps and find out exactly where you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because I just needed that context.
Yes. Well, I'm very fond of Humphrey, and he's a great guy. He and I had a big kind of back and forth. I wanted maps in the book. And he felt that they were unnecessary, and he got the last word. But we will, for all those Righteous Kill fans out there, we are going to be doing a website, and there will be maps on the website.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, I'm like you. When I read a book like this, I have the book in one hand and I have my computer with Google Maps on the other, and I go back and forth to see if it computes.
Well, it helps. You sort of.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So I hope you hear that, Humphrey. We need.
I think you've just been told.
For the second edition, we need to put the maps in.
Okay. So the book's been released how long?
It was released on the 15th of May.
Okay, so that's not all that long ago.
That's right.
What sort of reaction have you had from the literary world?
Well, it's sold on a variety of platforms. Barnes and Noble and other. One of the main ones is Amazon, obviously, particularly given COVID.
Yes.
And look, the reviews are good. The reviews are they're all, most of them are 5-star. There are a couple in there 4-star. I'll find out who you are. But yeah, they seem to be pretty good.
And are you appealing to a particular type of person?
Oh, look, I think it would appeal to, there's a genre out there, alternate history. There's this guy, Harry Turtledove, who's written he's probably written, 30, 40 books, various alternate
called alternate
history. I think it would it certainly would appeal to people who are interested in military thrillers, Tom Clancy types. That's why we talked about the issue of the hardware. I go into some detail in terms of the military hardware, and you asked me about that.
Yes.
I said, well, they don't call them military thrillers for nothing.
Right.
Techno thrillers for nothing. Because and I wanted it again to be very, very realistic. So, science fiction types, and people who are interested in Jewish history and Jewish literature.
Yes,
Sure.
yes, yes.
It's the ultimate Jewish revenge fantasy.
And it's a beauty. When you write a book like this, do you think about writing it for both men and women, or do you sort of say, look, this sort of story, military, war, science fiction, it sort of sounds it's more blokey.
Yeah, I think it's mostly a guidebook, but then on the other hand, there's romance in there,
Yes.
and there are a number of female readers who've gotten back to me and have said that they loved it. So maybe they just blip over all the military equipment and weaponry, but there's a number of kind of softer subtext or subplots in there. So
All right, we're going to open up the forum to questions in a moment. So if you've got any questions, now's the time to indicate by raising your hand electronically. So down on the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a little thing called reactions. If you click that, and click on the hand, David will see who's putting their hand up, and then we'll have you ask your question. So what's coming up next? Have you said you hinted that there was another project? So
well, yeah, I'm working on another book. That's it's kind of it's a wartime romance. Also has a Jewish thing.
Okay, not the sci-fi.
No. This isn't sci-fi.
Okay. And how far into that are you?
Oh, well, the funny thing is that, I told you that I had worked on Righteous Kill, and then I put it aside and I wrote a couple of screenplays. So one of this is based on one of my screenplays, and actually it's Humphrey's idea. He said, the usual pattern is that it goes from book to movie, book to screenplay. Well, there's no law that says it can't go in the reverse. And, I have a screenplay, a feature film screenplay. It's the perfect outline. So I'm just going on the best of that. It's a different genre. It's a different kind of writing, and you flesh it out, but it's the perfect outline. And I'm just...
okay, so this would be a fantastic movie, I imagine.
This?
Yeah.
Righteous Kill?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. HBO, I'm here.
So what are we waiting for? We're waiting for some movie mogul to come along.
The call from Hollywood.
Yeah.
I'm honing my Oscar acceptance speech.
So
I'd like to thank the Academy.
So in terms of the main character, okay, which actor would you see playing the main character?
Oh, look, I said before that the lack of realism in these kinds of things annoys me. So, Valkyrie in many ways was a great movie, but having Tom Cruise as Count von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who plants the bomb that almost kills Hitler, getting up there and saying, I would want the Israelis. I would want the Israeli characters to be played by Israeli actors,
right.
Germans by Germans, and to have, in the proper language with subtitles.
Oh, okay. So when the Germans are speaking, you want them to speak German, not English with a German accent?
Like The Longest Day, The Longest Day, the movie about D-Day, the Germans speaking German.
Yes.
With subtitles. I think that's a lot more
realistic.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have the star power of Tom Cruise playing a German colonel, but nonetheless.
Yes.
Maybe, I'm just a history nerd, I guess.
Okay, well, it would be a fantastic movie, I can tell you. So, on that note, David, have we got questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. The first one that I saw was from Leon. He actually typed his question, which was to ask about how you go about or choosing or getting a publisher. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah. Maybe Leon's a closet author.
Just before we let Ted answer that, we agreed before we started tonight that the best question will receive a free copy of Righteous Kill.
That's right. We have a bunch of them here.
We've got some here, so we can't, and it'll be signed. Now this is going to be Ted's decision. So if you've got a question, you've got to impress Ted. And he's going to decide who gets the free book. So on that note, you can.
I should say, let me just add that in order to raise your hand in some formats, you click on the participants, the icon called participants at the bottom of your screen, and that'll bring up a little hand on the right-hand side, which you can use to indicate that you want to ask a question.
Okay.
Over to you.
Okay, so I can only talk about the way that I did it. What you do, once you have a manuscript that's in a kind of a reasonable shape, then you send out what are called query letters that are basically there are 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then it's really hard to boil, particularly 150,000 word book, to boil that down to kind of have enough of a hook in 2 or 3 paragraphs. It certainly shouldn't be longer than 1 page, and most of the cognoscenti in the literary words say it should be more than 2 or 3 paragraphs. And so you have to boil it down and write it in an enticing way that creates a hook, and then you just shotgun these they're called query letters out there. And so, I probably sent out, I don't know, 150 of them, and I received expressions of interest from a couple of agents, and from this guy named Humphrey Hunter, who's in the UK, he's also a literary agent, but he's also his own, he has a publishing operation, and we began to talk, and I don't know, I think we really, I really liked him. I think he really liked me, and we kind of clicked, and he also offered a very, very good deal, better than the deal offered by some bigger publishing houses in terms of revenue, in terms of royalties. And so that's where we went. Yeah.
So when you're trying to get the interest of a publisher, is it the plot that you're using as the hook? Because
you want to make them interested enough so that they'll say, "Send me your manuscript."
Right. So you write them a thing and it says, "I've got this plot," and
you don't write it that way.
We go back in time.
No, you don't write it. I've got this plot. You write, but it's like what they say in the mood is you start in media res. It's like when you open the first page of a thriller, always starts in the middle of the action. So you write it in such a way that hopefully will pique their interest, and they'll write back and say, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Send me your manuscript. I want to give it a look."
Has anybody come up with this idea before that you know of?
Oh, yeah,
this concept of going back in time and attempting to ambush?
Actually, one of the first, when I read this book when I was a kid, I mentioned Harry Turtledove. I think one of his first books was called Guns of the South, and it was basically about a bunch of Afrikaner white supremacist Boers who travel back to Gettysburg and give AK-47s to the Confederacy, so the Confederacy will win the Civil War, and therefore it was actually, it wasn't just me reading Stephen Runciman, History of the Crusades, when I was 14. It was also, give credit to Harry Turtledove, Guns of the South was also, I think, an influence in terms of generating this idea for this book in my head.
So the publishers must get every day they must get.
Well, and I think Humphrey is unusual in that he accepts unsolicited or query letters, because in many cases you have to go through an agent, which means you have to pay another 15% of everything you earn to the agent, and then the agent is the one who
opens the doors
to the
for
publishers, and so I was very, very fortunate to come across Humphrey.
Okay, all right.
Next question is actually from Ailey.
Hi, Ted.
Good day, Ailey. How are you?
Good, good. I'm 3/4 of the way through your book. It's fantastic, it really is. And I did blip over the military stuff, I must admit, as a woman. But the story is amazing.
Thank you.
My question is, given the fact that you've now created this machine that can go back in time, would you consider writing a novel about going back to the 6-Day War, to 67? and fixing up the mistakes we made then?
That's a good one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I handled the issue of, I handled this question in the book, because the mad scientist or the genius scientist who stumbles across time travel is, he's the grandson of a Nazi war criminal, and he wants to prevent the Holocaust, but that's his sole focus, and he doesn't want to, give the secret of time travel to the Israelis so they can go back and prevent, like, the Yom Kippur War or the Six-Day War or whatever. So yeah, look, it's something I suppose, I would go back to 1648 and and deal with Chemlinsky, the pogroms that killed 100,000 Jews in the Ukraine, or go back to the Crusades, go back to 1096, and
you could go back to the time that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Yeah. That would be an interesting story.
Take a bunch of modern weapons into the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. I mean, if you're talking about Jewish history, unfortunately, the opportunities to
that's right.
to rectify instances of anti-Semitic persecution they're not too rare, unfortunately.
No, you could go back and give Moses a Glock. And
yeah.
That would change history.
Well, yeah, that's right. He could go to Pharaoh and say hello to my little friend.
Okay.
We've now got a written question. Someone says they haven't got a mic. It's from Volvi. It's been said that Israel coming into existence was mainly due to the Holocaust and the sense of guilt by the world. So going back to kill Hitler to prevent the Holocaust may well negate Israel, the commando unit you sent by them. Have you considered this particular paradox?
Yes, that is a conundrum that is addressed in the book, yes. And you'll have to read it to find out how. But yes, that is an issue that is definitely addressed in the book.
Okay.
Who thought about that
one? I'm going to take the liberty of pointing out to people that this is a compelling book, and if you haven't read it yet, you should definitely get your hands on a copy and do so. And I agree with Alan that I think that it does have the potential to be a movie, to make it to the screen. It is. I'm not a great reader of novels, but this particular one certainly falls into the category of being difficult to put down.
It's true. And perhaps this whole COVID thing, Ted, might have been opportune for you because people were around and looking for something to read. That certainly I was.
Well, that's what Humphrey said that actually, this is worked to our benefit in terms of book sales.
Yeah.
He made that point, Humphrey. Yeah.
Okay. And of course the book is available both in paper form
it's in hard copy, in trade paperback, and in ebook. Yes.
And what sort of percentages to
you have three. You have Kindle Unlimited, where basically you're paid on the basis of page reads, and then you have people who download the book, and then you have the hard copy. And it's more or less, Humphrey has more experience in this than I, but he told me that the general kind of rule of thumb, give or take, is probably 80 to 85% are ebooks.
Right.
And then 15 to 20% are the physical books. That's the new world of publishing.
So only 15% of books
people
are buying physical paper.
Yeah, people like it on their Kindle. There's on the tram with their little Kindle and they're reading novels. Yeah,
that's quite.
I was surprised too.
I'm surprised because we haven't had electronic books for all that long, and yet they've clearly captivated the market, haven't they?
Well, they're convenient. That's right.
Yes.
And I'm the same. If it's like a serious book that I want to keep in my library, then I'll order the hard copy. But if it's just kind of, this kind of enjoyable airport fiction kind of book, then I'll usually just order it on
Yeah.
as an ebook.
What about libraries? How do you get it into libraries? Is that
Well,
difficult?
yeah. Look, I think part of that is just being entrepreneurial and getting it out there and
So
notifying them.
you go to the libraries, or do you wait till they come to you?
Well, in some cases they come to me, but for example, my local library, I've contacted them and I said, and what's my angle, my marketing angle in that case? I said, I'm a local author,
Yes.
So you want to promote the local arts? Well, stock my book.
Right. Okay. And of course, we're doing this tonight because we're not able to have a physical, traditional book launch. So
we were planning that, but then nature intervened with the virus. That's right.
Yes. So is the plan to still do that at some stage?
Hopefully. Well, who knows?
We don't know, but that could be months away.
I don't know. I'll have to ask Dan Andrews. See what the COVID regime will be in Victoria.
Well, he doesn't have a problem letting people go to a mass protest, so we'll just call it a mass protest. And
that's right.
We'll take some copies of the
book.
book.
We'll assemble on the steps of Parliament House, and we'll do
That's right. So that might be the way. I think we've got something there, Ted. Anybody else want to ask any questions?
There's various people who've made comments, but I don't see any other questions sitting there at the moment. So we're 8 minutes to the hour, and I might say that the easiest way to purchase the book is simply to go to Amazon and you can do a search for Ted's name or the title, Righteous Kill, or both, and it pops up. And we've also put links in the AJA emails and on the Facebook page. So it gives me an opportunity to mention what's coming up now, and to I'll see if I can get it back on the screen. No, not cancel that. Here we go. Right. If anyone's not yet a member of AJA who would like to join, there's the details. Also, if you're able to provide a donation or wish to send us an email, there's the address on the screen. Next week, we have something which might be called a blockbuster event. Seeing the big political issue at the time is Israeli sovereignty. So we will be focusing on that. There's a movie called Whose Land, which is all about the modern international law, which demonstrates the legitimacy of the State of Israel. Now, what is really special about this event coming up on Thursday next week is that we will be joined by the producer of this film, Hugh Kitson, together with a renowned international law expert from The Hague, Andrew Tucker, and someone who I imagine is well known to all the people associated with AJA, Colonel Richard Kemp. So we haven't yet started to advertise that, but we will shortly. And next week is certainly not to be missed.
Yeah,
so,
before we end, if I could just say, in terms of the free book, we had a question from Volvi, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, so if Volvi could...
Is he the winner?
Give his or her, in the comments, his or her snail mail address, we'll get a book out to them.
Congratulations, Volvi, you're the winner.
Yeah.
Well done.
Okay, fantastic. And thanks so much, Ted and Alan, for a really interesting discussion. And
David, I just want to expand briefly on next week. So just people may not know, but you mentioned that Hugh Kitson is the person who produced that fantastic documentary called Whose Land. It has been shown in Australia a couple of years ago. And of course, everybody knows Colonel Kemp. I just wanted to mention that the other person we have on is Andrew Tucker, who's an expert in international law. And he's written a book on the whole issue of international law and Israel and because we hear so much about how Israel is in breach of international law, and he's a lawyer who knows all about it, and he's a big expert on that area. So he's also going to be very interesting to speak with next week. So these three people have all got something different to bring to the table, but it's going to be very, very interesting.
We've got one last question that's just popped up. Ted, for you, it's just what one piece of advice would you offer to an aspiring author?
Oh God, you know, just have the courage to believe in yourself. I'm sure you've heard this before. You know, I went to a couple of years ago. I went to a writers' retreat with Elizabeth George, the very famous crime writer in Italy, and this is not a Ted Lapkin original, but get it on the page, and you can revise it later, and just and be prepared, be open-minded in terms of constructive criticism. Revise. I don't know how many revisions.
So did people do that to you, Ted? Did people say, "Oh, look, that particular part, you're barking up the wrong tree"?
Yeah.
So you've got to be resilient enough to take that on board.
That's exactly right. And revise. Never stop honing. Never stop polishing.
Okay.
All right. So on that note, David, we'll say good night to people.
Thank you very much to everybody who attended, and I hope you get the book. And
do get a copy. I can promise you. And I can promise you that this really is a book that's difficult to put down. It's a great story, and the Jewish angle, the Israeli angle,
the Nazi killing angle.
Yeah, we all like. Well, I'm not going to say what happens in the end, but it's got a terrific ending, and you will enjoy this book. I can promise you. So thanks everybody, and good night to you all. We might just hang around for a few minutes in case anybody wants to speak informally. So apart from that, we'll see you all next week, and good night to everybody.